Hello, good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. And welcome to our August Empower panel, Stronger Relationships, Smarter Legislation. If you could be so kind as to, in the comments, just let us know that you can hear us okay. That always makes me feel better. Otherwise, we will keep going. So welcome. If you are unfamiliar with 911 Wonder Women, I am Sarah Weston, the founder and executive director. These Empower panels are a way to keep our mission going, to provide training on topics that are not talked about quite enough. So we want to welcome you. This is our Empower panel that has to do with our legislative initiative, Tour and Tell, and we are honored to partner with the NG 911 Institute. If you are unfamiliar with the Institute, you're also in the right place. The executive director, Wes Wright, is here, and he's going to be telling you a little bit more about that. So before we get started, I would be a bad executive director if I did not plug our current fundraiser that we have going on right now. This is our annual crowdsourcing fundraiser. I'm going to put the link into the chat, and you can check it out afterwards if you'd like. Okay, our Tour and Tell initiative is all about building relationships with your members of Congress. This is a great time to build that relationship. One, because there is a legislative recess, and two, because it's really important to build a relationship now so that when there is a legislative ask to be had, you already have that connection. So that's what we are going to talk about today, is how to do that. So without further ado, it is my honor to turn this over to our moderator, the chair of the 911 Wonder Woman board, a 20-year veteran working in the federal government as the director of the National 911 program, Laurie Flaherty.
Oh, thanks, boss. And welcome everyone to today's session. The first thing we're going to do is just sort of run through everyone who's going to speak so you have an idea of who they are. So let me just run through the names, and if you could just give me a couple sentences on who you are and why you're talking about this topic. I'm going to start with Heather McGaffin.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Heather McGaffin, and I'm the proud director of the Office of Unified Communications, which is Washington, D.C.'s 911 and 311 Center. I'm also the co-chair of the Next Gen 911 Institute. And this is important to me because every day I look out my window, I look at the dome of the Capitol. And so we've got a huge legislative presence from everywhere that each of you live and work and play. And so I always want to do my best to make sure that we represent 911 well when congressional leaders are in the city.
Thanks, Heather. Next, Roxy Van Gundy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Roxy Van Gundy. I'm also the proud director of Lyon County Emergency Communication Center. We live in Northeast Kansas. For Kansas, we're considered a medium-ish size center. For the rest of the universe, we're probably pretty small. I'm here to just talk about maybe some other ways to cultivate relationships with your legislator. Our members of Congress serve a very large area. So we have to kind of think about it another way. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Roxy. Next, Wes Wright.
Hi, I'm Wes. I'm the executive director of the NG 911 Institute. I'm also the least important person on this webinar, so I will be talking the least amount. And I think that you'll be hearing from Heather and Roxy on some good ECC perspectives and from Christina on the Hill perspective. So I'm just going to try to get out of the way.
Thanks, Wes. And last but not least, Christina Lassiter.
Hi, yes, I am Christina Lassiter. I'm Legislative Director for Congresswoman Kat Cammack. She represents Florida's 3rd District, which is a rural North Central Florida. I will be giving the perspective of a Hill staffer, but more specifically, my boss is the co-chair of the Next Gen 911 Caucus for the House.
Great, thank you all. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, if you could just put them in the Q&A, Sarah will be monitoring those. We'll run through each person's presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A session at the very end. So even though your questions aren't being answered, while this is going on, please know that we will do our best to answer them all after everyone's had a chance to speak. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this, we're going to start with the perspective of the 911 centers. We're looking at both a large urban 911 center, as well as one that is in more of a rural area, just to give you a little bit of a perspective on how this might differ from one place to the other. So we're going to start with Heather McGaffin, who, as she told you, is the director of the Office of Unified Communications in Washington, D.C. Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. This is really, really important to me. I came from a really small center where we didn't get many visitors. And now that I am in a large center, we get a ton of visitors. We probably should start counting, but it's definitely over a couple of hundred annually. And some of our coolest interactions are with folks like Christina from the Hill. We don't get a lot of congressional leaders to the Hill, although shout out to Representative Cammack and Representative Torres, who did announce the Next Gen 911 Caucus for this Congress just a few weeks ago. And came to the center and toured, and Rep. Cammack actually sat and listened to 911 calls with a 911 call taker. And she did it 9 months pregnant, and her new baby is beautiful. So I also would remind everybody that Rep. Torres was a 911 dispatcher. And so that's really important. It gave us time to not just show and tell what we have at our center, but it gave us time to really hear what those two amazing 911 Wonder Women are doing for 911 across the nation. For me, I think it's really important because, like I said, we do sit in the federal city. We do have a lot of contact with staffers, and we do have the ability to kind of talk about 911. But as we always say, if you've been in one 911 center, you've been in one 911 center. So the 911 center in Washington, D.C., that seats 227 people is vastly different from Roxy's in Kansas, and vastly different from a majority of the 911 centers across our nation. And so it's really important to me that when staffers or folks leave, I always say, this isn't real. This is real for Washington, D.C., but this isn't real for the rest of the country. And so I always tell them to get in touch, or I try to put them in touch with whomever the ECC director is for their center, representing the 6,000 centers across the nation. I also, this is really important to me because it's that age-old adage of, like, if you don't know what you don't know, then how can you help improve something? And we have leaders that want to help to improve things, but if we don't tell our story, somebody else is going to tell our story for us, and they're not going to get it right. And so if we can invite them in, if we can see what's being done on a daily basis at a center, and if we can also share, not just from our perspective as leaders, but if we can let them sit with call takers, if we can let them sit with dispatchers, if call takers and dispatchers can share their stories, that is really, really powerful. I always have an opportunity when lawmakers come to visit, whether they're local or federal. We don't have state lawmakers, they're local or federal, but you do. But whenever anybody comes, have a few people identified that can tell their story, and not just tell their story about the job that they do, but tell their story that humanizes them, their dads, their moms, their partners, they're taking care of other people, and they need to tell that whole story. They need to be raw, and they need to be vulnerable. And so for me, that's why it's important, because we all are people and we are trying to balance different things in our lives. And one of those things is dealing with people's worst moments. And the other is making sure that we don't let our moments or our lives get in the way of how we handle those. That's a tough balance. And I think folks really need to see that.
Laurie,
Oh,
I
we can't hear
cannot
you, Laurie.
hear you anymore.
Oh, sorry about that. I have one question for you, Heather, before we move on to the next speaker. I think the idea of stories is very, very powerful. And particularly if you are conducting a tour. Statistics are useful, but I think if you're telling a story about one of their constituents, that is certainly something that may stick more than any statistics. Would you agree with that? Do you do that on your tours?
Absolutely. One of the most powerful things that I think that we can do is tell those stories. We can tell those stories, but also what's also really powerful is if you have somebody who maybe you delivered their baby, maybe your call taker or dispatcher gave your specialist gave CPR instructions to these folks. You can bring those people in and they can advocate for you. So I know they wouldn't mind me telling this story because they love to tell this story, but there's a couple, they live in Colorado now, but they were in Washington, D.C. The wife, they were dating at the time and they're married now. The wife went into cardiac arrest. The husband called 911, got one of our call takers. She gave CPR instructions and she regained a pulse prior to fire and EMS arriving on scene. They tell their story. They come back every December to tell their story on Capitol Hill, but they also tell it locally. And I mentioned that they were dating and now married because they invited and flew out the call taker from that day to their wedding in Colorado. And she was a part of their wedding because they really just feel so strongly that if it weren't for her early intervention and giving CPR instructions, that the wedding wouldn't have happened. And so whenever they're in town, I always try to invite, especially our local lawmakers, in to hear that story and meet them so that they can see how it really was a full circle moment. And so that is powerful. And that is what I think helps us move, at least for me locally, that's what helps us move legislation forward. Because otherwise it's the bad things. It's the situations that didn't work out that tend to drive legislation for me on a local level.
That's a great story, Heather. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on now to more of a rural perspective. And Roxy Van Gundy from Lyon County, Kansas. The floor is yours.
Well, I wanted to just talk about a couple of things. One, with Heather, she has a great advantage of being local to our federal legislators. I do not. So I have to really make a concerted effort to reach out to staffers and make sure that they know that I'm here and I care about what they do and I'm open to questions. And if they're ever home, our door is always open. I also have to make a very big effort to show up. So a lot of these legislators do town halls, they do certain events throughout our city throughout the year where they talk to different groups, they talk to different, their party groups. I show up to those. That way they see my face. That way I can say, hey, Senator Moran, it's nice to see you again. I'm Roxy from the 911 Center. Just making those connections is so important. I think sometimes rural folks think that we don't really have a voice, like who's going to listen to us? We live in middle America. They do really care. So it's very important that you get out there and make the effort to connect with them because those things do matter in the end. The one thing I would say, it is harder on a rural side to make those larger connections because so many of us are overseen by sheriffs and police chiefs. A lot of times, sheriffs and police chiefs don't want us to be doing that. So if you live in a state where there are standalone centers like Kansas, there's very few of us, but we have to have a louder voice because a lot of the folks who are managing centers in our state don't have the ability to connect with their lawmakers. I think it's very important, especially in a rural setting, to maybe practice your federal connection with state lawmakers. Get in touch with people who are legislating for your districts. start there. Make sure they know that you're always open for questions. If they're confused about something, you're the person that they need to contact, and then work your way into bigger arenas, because the story is still the same. We need help, we need funding, we need to be classified as protective service. And I think that resonates not only on a state level, but also on a federal level. So just don't give up, I think, is my biggest message, because you can still make those connections and still tell your story, even if those lawmakers can't make it to your center. Every year, reach out to the office and introduce yourself. I'm sure just like our 911 centers, offices have staffing rollover. Just make sure that you're like, hey, I'm me, and I'm out here, and I care about what goes on. And just remember that your voice does matter. It doesn't matter if you live in Kansas or Oklahoma or Washington, D.C. Everybody has a story, and your lawmakers are there to hear it. So don't lose that opportunity.
Roxy, I appreciate you're talking about sort of like what hoops you have to jump through in order to, set up a tour in the first place. So, how have you overcome those, or do you have any advice for anybody in terms of working through that? And Heather, this is for you too.
I think it's really important in a rural setting that you make sure that you have those conversations with your oversight. So if a sheriff is your oversight, have the conversation with him on why it's important for you to speak with legislators as well. You have a different perspective than a law enforcement perspective. And while you respect everything he does for the center, you have a voice that needs to be heard. Lay out that same argument with your oversight so they understand that the next time they have the senator come and see their new jail or see whatever it is they have, that you're invited too. I'm really lucky that I live in a jurisdiction where I'm an equal, and they understand that, our voice is different, and we have different needs and different things we need to talk about. So I just would encourage people to have that conversation with their oversight, whoever it is, and just be honest about our story. Like Heather said, we all have a story, and sometimes I think we don't tell it very well to our public safety counterparts either. So help them understand why it's important that you speak to legislators too.
Yeah, that's really, really important, Roxy. I think one of the other things that I do is I invite them in, and not just on big weeks, but just on a regular day. And I always kind of just use the phrase, literally, we don't have locks on these doors. You can come in anytime. And maybe I do mean that fully. I prefer if you're there during the day, but I think it's important for them to see how we operate around the clock. I also think that, when they understand enough to know the importance, but not enough to tell the full story, that you just say, hey, I want to educate you more. I want to bring you in, but also I want you to extend that invitation. You never have to ask me if you can bring somebody in, just bring them in. And so we've had that. We've had even international visitors come in when the fire department hosts them. And that's really great. I've made several connections that way. I also am a really firm believer that you should invite the public in. And a couple of times a year we do that, because you never really know who's there. You don't know. Maybe somebody knows somebody, or hey, so and so's my neighbor, or oh, I used to work for this legislator. You don't know who has influence that maybe you're not tapping. And so if you have these community days, I think that's really important. And Roxy has a really great Citizens Academy, just for 911, but we do not have that. But what we do have is our Metropolitan Police Department does have a Citizen Engagement Academy, and one of their stops, which is a full 2 hours, is to the 911 center. We always run out of time, and I always hear, we had no idea that you guys do all of that here. And so just making sure that you really have that interaction with the public, not just focused on legislators. Of course, we need to focus there, but just on the general public, because they are the ones who are going to be grassroots campaigning and really pushing things forward for you. They can be some really, really amazing advocates.
That's great. Thank you. Roxy, just one more question for you before we turn it over to Wes. So, okay, your invitation has been accepted, and Heather, you can answer this too. Like, what do you do to prepare? What kinds of things are you thinking about? What kind of people are you lining up? What kinds of things are you doing?
Um, I think a couple of things. I think every 911 center can relate that you go in and you say, let's clean, let's make sure everything looks amazing, because it's our home, right? We live in it. So it's a little crazy sometimes. But I think a couple of things that I want to make sure that I do is make my public safety partners aware, also make my staff aware. I think another good thing to remember is to invite your government oversight, be it county, city, whoever oversees you. I think that is just a, a nice thing to do and a appropriate thing to do if you're going to have a legislator come and visit. And I would speak to the staff before I did this, but I would ask the legislator staff if it's okay if I contact our media. It's a pretty slow news day in Northeast Kansas, so when a senator stops by, that's a big deal. But you definitely want to make sure that that's okay and that's expected, and everybody knows what they're walking into. But that would kind of be my first couple of things to hit.
Yeah, the same here. I think the other thing, and I kind of touched on this, was identify a few folks who are willing to share their stories. Never make somebody share a story, because that can be really, really uncomfortable. Learn about them as people. What are they? Who do they represent? What are their views on things? What is like their track record with 911 if you've had 911 legislation? Are there things that maybe they didn't understand that you could help explain better? Do they want to sit down? Do they want to sit down? Do they want to listen with somebody? Have you identified the person that they're going to sit with? Because walking up to somebody and be like, hey, can the senator or the representative sit with you? They're going to be like, no, absolutely not. But if you've prepped them for that, then it's welcoming. The technology is working properly. But the one thing that I wouldn't do is try to make it perfect. And this is why. You need something. There is absolutely something that every one of us can name right now that we need in our UCC. It could be a new window, it could be blinds, it could be new technology, it could be protocols, but we need something. And if we kind of, roll out the red carpet and do the white glove test, and we are just sitting here saying, like, it works so great, it's so perfect, everything's great, everything's perfect, they're going to take your word for that. And the fire chief isn't telling lawmakers everything's perfect. The police chief's not telling the lawmakers everything's perfect. And you shouldn't feel pressure to do that either. You need to be real about what you need and articulate why you need it and how it can help improve the outcome for those that are relying on the system. So if you've got consoles that are broken and you haven't had money for consoles in the last budget year, and it doesn't look like you're getting it for this, be real about that. Hey, we could have 10 consoles working, but right now we only have 4 because these 6 are broken. And if we had $300,000 to get these fixed, we could better serve this community. That goes a long way. And so identify your needs, be real about what they are, and share that story, and know what they're willing to support, and know what they're willing to maybe help you get done.
Thank you both. That was great. We really appreciate your presenting the 911 perspective on doing what we call the tour and tell. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Wes Wright, who is the Executive Director of the NG 911 Institute, and we're going to move on to the lawmakers' perspective.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thanks, Laurie, and Heather and Roxy have given some really good background. And I think the one message that I would like to leave you with is the Institute is here to help on both sides. So, Heather talked about doing some of the legwork and preparation on if you have an elected official visiting your center, what's their vote history? Who are their constituents? We can help with that. I mean, that's part of our role. The Institute was established more than 20 years ago to be an educational resource for members of Congress and their staffs. So Christina's member is relatively new to chairing the caucus, obviously very passionate about public safety issues. I have not had the chance to bug Christina a whole lot yet, but that chance will come. But also, we're here for her. So if any member of Congress is back in their home district, their home state, they can reach out to us and figure out whether they want to do an ECC tour. Where should that go? We are here as a resource to the Next Gen 911 Caucus, which her boss, she mentioned, is the GOP House co-chair of. And what we do is try to educate members of Congress and present opportunities for them to learn more about 911 related technologies, and then things that we can do to advance the deployment of NG 911 throughout the country. And we've kind of alluded to this. There's no anti-911 caucus. The biggest challenge is education and making sure folks are aware of the issues, because by and large, you expect 911 to work when you need it, but thankfully, most people don't need it on a daily basis. And so the extent we can get people in centers, whether that's the local center in DC when Congress is in session, or a center like Roxy's when a senator or a representative is in their home state or home district, it's really powerful stuff. And that's kind of what we're here for. So some of the issues that we have focused on through the Institute, and this year our priority is growing the caucus. Sarah had put in the chat a link to our website that lists the caucus. It's the only bipartisan, bicameral, so we're in both the House and the Senate, and we have members in both parties that promotes 911 issues like this. And if your representative or senator is not on the list, that doesn't mean you're off the hook. We could use your help in recruiting them and educating them about the caucus. And so if there's a constituent concern, if there's an issue that we can help elevate to DC and get them interested, get them to join the caucus, and then help them learn more about 911, the industry and the country writ large fit. So that's what the Institute is here for. We have a board of 15 people. Heather mentioned she is the chair of our board. It's a mix between folks that are in the public safety space and then some sponsors. NASNA, NINA, and APCO also have permanent slots on our board. So we do try to be the voice of public safety, but also, the ECCs and then some of the emerging technologies. And that's kind of the role that the Institute plays. We've helped facilitate a lot of ECC visits, a lot with Heather that are local, some that are back home states, home districts, and how to do more of that. I'm going to turn it over to Christina here in a moment. She's going to talk about how hectic life can be for a Hill staffer, how we as an industry can best coordinate and schedule visits and other educational opportunities that folks on the Hill may be able to take advantage of it. And I will say it's equally as important, if not more so, to cultivate that relationship with Hill staff, because members are busy, staffers are busy, but staffers have different portfolios. And if you can find somebody whose boss is passionate about 911, who understands these issues and is willing to engage, it can be really powerful. And so Christina's going to give us some tips, I think, on how to get on schedule, your priorities heard. Heather alluded to this, but I'm sure Christina can confirm there's not a lot of people that come to the Hill and say, oh, everything's fine, everything's great, we don't need anything from you. So she's getting pulled in a million different directions. And to the extent we can explain our issues and bring them to her, I think it's something that she would like to hear from. And also, I've elegantly dodged Laurie's ability to ask me any questions by handing the baton directly to Christina. So there you go.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for having me today. As was said in the introductions, I am Legislative Director for Congresswoman Kat Cammack. So what that means is I manage her legislative agenda and her legislative team. So everything's going to be coming from this perspective of a staffer on the Hill who's we have scheduled one of these tours and had many policy talks about these issues. But yeah, so the day-to-day life in a congressional office, as was mentioned, is very hectic, especially if we are in session. Every day can be a mix of policy research, drafting legislation, preparing the member for hearings or markups or floor votes. We'll be taking meetings with stakeholders, responding to constituents about questions. So we are really just constantly triaging, deciding what's urgent, what's strategic, what's needs our boss's immediate and direct attention. And the pace is fast and the schedule changes constantly. So I would say when you're engaging, persistence and flexibility are essential. Just make sure you're at the top of our inbox so we know, okay, this is important to them. We can make sure to engage with y'all. For the member schedule, they usually are very tight schedules. They typically start the day with like a breakfast event, and then they'll have hearing, votes, caucus meetings, constituent meetings, press events, and then round out the day with an evening reception. So staff, especially our scheduler, will really guard the schedule very carefully. And it's not just about being a gatekeeper, but about making sure that our member has enough time when they are in these meetings to actually absorb what's being said and to act on those priorities. So site visits back home, I think, are especially valuable because they can allow the member to see things firsthand, but also just be away from the rush of DC in session. And when you do get a member there, I would say kind of their expectations, they're going to want it to be efficient, substantive, and memorable. So like you were saying earlier, kind of show them the people behind the service, the local operators, and the real stories. I think that that's something that stuck with my boss after she went, is the being able to listen into the calls. And she sat and spoke with the operator for 5 or 10 minutes about what it was like and the issues that she was having. And I think that was very impactful. Also, just demonstrating the technology in action rather than just talking about it. Making sure that you're connecting the dots, explaining how the federal funding or the legislation directly impacts your ability to serve the community, and provide a clear takeaway. So if it's, like she said, if it's funding or a specific piece of legislation that you want them to co-sponsor, or if it's joining the Next Gen 911 caucus, make sure that that is clear in your ask. That makes it much easier for us to be like, okay, they need funding. This is why. Let's take this back. We'll do some research. It makes it much easier on the staff, but also for the member to just be aware of exactly what it is that's needed. And I would say, yeah, building a lasting relationship with the member and the office is, I think, very helpful. And so I would say starting with the staff, like Wes mentioned earlier, staffers, we're the ones who brief our bosses. So if you can get our attention and give us the information and make it seem that it's impactful, you've won half the battle right there. We're the ones who will bring it to them and be like, hey, we got this request. We think it would be very important. I would say also making sure you know who to contact in the office is very important. And it's very simple to get that information. Just Google the office number, give them a call, and just ask, hey, who's your scheduler and what's their email? Who's the staffer who handles this? Who is your field rep? Like I said, I think it's very, sometimes it seems complicated to figure that information out. But yeah, just give us a call. We answer those calls all the time. Happy to give out that information. I will say when we are there, when the member's there, kind of framing the conversation around shared goals is helpful. We're all interested in community safety and efficient emergency response and fiscal responsibility, and making sure that you keep in touch with the staff after the visit, I think, is also very helpful. Is like, yes, it's great to get them out there, but making sure you're continually engaging so that when a vote comes up on something, you can flag it for them and be like, hey, just FYI, the funding vote is coming up. We'd love your support. I think that's very helpful because, like I said, we're juggling a million things. So just that little reminder can be incredibly helpful. Like I said, I would think follow up, but don't be overwhelming would be another thing, because we do get probably hundreds, maybe thousands of emails a day. But yeah, I think that's all I had.
Yeah, so that was great.
That's great. Go to Wes.
The only other thing I would add is we do have kind of a directory database of the right staff contacts. Sorry, Laurie. But even before you call the office, feel free to reach out to us, because we may have had a relationship with that office in the past and may be able to make that introduction for you. So that was the only thing I wanted to add.
Christina, one of the things that I've learned over time is, sort of from the 911 perspective, there's a misconception that if the member doesn't show up, that you've sort of failed in some way in terms of making a connection. And frankly, from my experience, and this is, sort of informal analogy, if you will, but like, if you want to know what's going on, you're going to ask the owner or the bartender. Like, my money's on the bartender every time. So if you could just talk about the importance of establishing a relationship with the staff, that would probably be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, we are the ones who are telling our bosses information on things. We're briefing them on issues in when constituents call, we're the ones talking to them. We're the ones looking at the messages, engaging with them on concerns that they're having. So yeah, making sure that we're aware of what's going on is, I think, yeah, crucial to making sure that the member is aware and that you give us exactly the information that you think we'll need to give to the boss and exactly the ask that you're asking for. But yeah, I think going through the staffer, you've won half the battle if you can get the staffer on board.
There's another misconception that I have come across, and that is that it's sort of along the lines of what you have accomplished by doing a site visit. And I realize that, especially in August when members are home, they go to companies, they go to associations, they go to 911 centers, so what have you actually accomplished in this tour? Because I think on the 911 side, there's a perspective that like that's all you need to do, and your needs have been registered, and like there will be action. But it generally it takes more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that the follow-up is key on that, and especially flagging like if it's a funding issue, making sure that if appropriations is coming up, being like, hey, make sure these are the programs we rely on, and we'd love to make sure that they were funded fully, or if they need more funding. Just yeah, I think the follow-up is key in that, and just maintaining a good relationship with the staffer, not only when you need something or anything, just making, checking in, kind of seeing how are things up on the hill? Just, yeah, a light check-in doesn't have to be a lot, but yeah, just a little touch base every once in a while.
I think one of the things you said that really struck me was mutual benefit. And it's important to understand that whatever action you take has to be for the benefit of both. So I'm going to go to Christina first, and then Roxy and Heather. If you could talk about that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd say, you are looking for funding or support, and, we're just looking for information or strong examples of how policy decisions can help our constituents. I think that's very important, is just being able to come away with a good understanding of exactly what the issue is and how that's impacting our constituents. I think that's one of the main things that we are looking for to get out of these kind of visits.
I think just to piggyback off of what Christina said, they don't know if you don't tell them. And they're not going to know how to help you if you don't tell them. And they don't know what's impacting their district if you don't tell them. So just create that circle of life, help them understand that because of this, these things can happen. And that's how it impacts their constituents. Tell the full story because they don't know what they don't know. So just try to be as open and transparent about that as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I think it's a good learning experience for us in 911 centers because we know what are the pressing issues in other arenas. Are there things that we can help? Are there things that we're doing that might be counterproductive? Or are there things that we're doing that could be collaborated with another initiative or we could work off of? I think for me, one of those big things is really around things as simple as location and new maps. I've talked a lot if you've ever kind of had a conversation with me about a 911 Wonder Woman, Cheryl Kagan, and she is a legislator in the state for Maryland, and she has really helped connect dots that maybe I was siloed and didn't know about. She put GIS with 911 in more of a real way, not just on a 30,000 view or 30,000 foot view level. And so one thing about lawmakers is they have networks that are really, really amazing. And what I've learned is they're not afraid to share them. If they think that there's somebody in their network that can help you advance something or understand something better, they're always willing to share that. And I've made so many connections that way too. And I think that that's always really important. Make sure that when you're there, you're networking, you're talking about things, you're talking about who you are, and there's always somebody out there that can, help you do something. I think you just have to ask. And so I'll kind of leave it there.
That's great. I think one of the things that one of you mentioned is, the fact that, Roxy, I think it was you that said that, 911 like always works. So, it can create an impression that there's no need there. And frankly, it's like over 200 million times a year, people call that number and it works. And, in some places it's like Velcroed and duct taped together, but it works. And so, the only time you hear about 911 is when it doesn't, right? So, you want to be able to tell the stories about when it does. You want to be able to explain the technology in English, without using acronyms. One of the things I've always wanted to institute is like a acronym jar. You know how they have swear jars in some places, like, we could make a lot of money that way. But explaining things in English is very important, and understanding the shared goals. I think this is a great opportunity. This is Christina, please disagree with me if you think so, but most of these are very positive kind of press events if they're interested in that. So you're giving folks a chance to shine. In terms of engaging a group of people in a profession that is obviously important to everybody. And so there is a lot of mutual benefit there. I think we have just a few minutes left. Go ahead, Wes.
There's one other question, and I posed it to Christina, but it was asking, is it helpful to have kind of a leave behind after one of these meetings or after a visit, or is that wasted paper? In my perspective, it is helpful to have that, especially for staff, because Christina, you said you're going to go brief your boss, but I certainly shouldn't answer that for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think the hill runs on one pagers and leave behinds. I think those are very important. I wouldn't leave like a binder or too many pages. Those usually won't get looked at. But yeah, a very concise one page. And for while you're at the visit, I think is very helpful just to refer to, but also just emailing a digital copy so we have it whenever we want to pull it up is very, very helpful.
And I know, at least from my experience, when a staffer calls you and is looking for something, they're generally looking for it because there's something happening like right now. Like, if you're contacted by someone, that's generally not an email that you want to like wait for a couple of days, because they're looking for an answer right away. And that if they sort of like, if you create the impression that you can't be counted on to give them a response, then you've lost an opportunity there. So
Heather, yeah, I think in that same vein, if they have to reschedule, just understand things come up, especially in their jobs, things happen. And so just be flexible, right? You're going to be there. So just be flexible.
Well, we're not going anywhere, right?
Not going anywhere.
Thank you all for sharing your insights on this. I think it's really been a valuable hour. I just want to spend a few minutes, and Sarah, I'm going to turn to you because there are resources available to you if you're wondering, okay, like this sounds like a great idea, now what? Both from 911 Wonder Women and from the Institute, there are resources that are available to you on the 911 Wonder Women website. You will find a lot of information about the tour and tell that we are currently promoting, as well as a few pieces that will be really helpful to you in terms of just supporting your efforts. Some of them are geared toward the 911 community. There's one document there that is basically a do and don't kind of thing, do's and don'ts for tours. There are some there are some resources that are geared more toward the legislative staff in terms of like, why is this important, and 10 truths from a legislative staffer that were very, very helpful to look at. Wes, what kinds of things can folks, you were talking a little bit about sort of resources if people like, or if people on the Hill are trying to like find out where are the 911 centers in my district, like how do they do that?
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of that stuff necessarily on our website. The caucus membership list is on the website, office contacts, but if there are gaps in that, it might be because the legislator is not a part of the caucus. So that'd be step one, and you can reach out and let me know, because like I said, our goal at the Institute, at least through the end of the year and early next year, is to grow the caucus. And so that's something that we would take on. We also work closely, I mentioned this, Nina Apko and NASNA are permanent board members, but we work closely with them to make sure we have directories of Hill staff and the right folks in the right offices, and that can change with some frequency. And so if there's an office you're trying to get in touch with, if you say we want to host someone when there's the next congressional recess, how should we start? Again, feel free to reach out and we can put you in touch with the right person, and obviously work with Christina to help grow the caucus if you have leads and people that are interested.
So one of the things you can do is go to the NG 911 Institute page and join. It is free. You can join and be a member and get information emailed to you straight to your inbox, so you don't have to go searching for it, which is awesome. So I put that link into the chat as well. And one thing we can do as a follow-up is send out all these links to everyone who is registered. So we can do that. We have like 10 minutes. So I want to, before I let you go, I want to make the most of this time. So I had a couple of questions. So for Roxy and Heather, if you have in the past used like leave behinds or like one pagers about your centers, is that something you'd be willing to share with us, and we can share as like examples of how to do this?
Absolutely. You can also, if you have a few minutes, go to ouc.dc.gov. We share all of that on our website. So ouc.dc.gov. I think that the other thing, if I just could really quick, this kind of popped into my brain, make sure after you have a visit that you do a wraparound and a thank you. A nice thank you card, handwritten is always my preference. And pictures. If you have folks that are taking pictures, make sure that you share those back, because I don't know who does your social media, Christina, for the representative, but does a great job, and they tagged us, and we were able to tag her back, and so that really just helps to elevate views not only to your social media, but then your website traffic, where maybe you have listed what you need or what your priorities are, and that's really helpful to the community.
The only thing I would add, Sarah, is there's the old adage, all politics is local. And so a leave behind that's most effective is tailored to the specific state or district that's impacted. It's going to be different per center. And I think that's one of the massive benefits of getting an elected official to visit your center when they're home. Christina mentioned that maybe the schedule's a little bit lighter, or they might be able to do that, but also they see how it impacts the people that are going to vote for them and how it impacts their community. I think that's always more powerful.
Yes. Yes. And like also on that note, one of the things that I learned from talking to a staffer was, and we touched on it, it's like what you can provide them, and doing a little research before that member comes to your center about what their interests are can be really helpful. Like say they are like really into developing like the police department. You have data that they might want or need, like crime statistics from like the area that you cover, or what have you. So depending on what is important to that member, you might be able to like offer them something that's helpful to them. And what better way to build a relationship is to offer something while you're making that ask. So that's something else I've learned to consider. Christina, do you have any experience with somebody doing that?
Leaving a leaf behind?
Or what is the most impactful leave behind information or offering of information or like stories that you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I think just being concise and direct on the one pager is to be like, here is the important things that you need to know about our center. Here is our ask. It kind of makes it easier for us to refer back to and to know exactly what it is that is needed in that situation. For the stories, I mean, it just makes it that much easier to remember when things pop up. Is be like, oh, I remember when we visited the 911 center and this happened and they said this and this is why this is so important. It's just being able to have that something memorable to refer back to is very important for not only the staff but for the boss when they're down there on the floor talking to other members about the experience that they had. I think that's can be very impactful.
The other thing I would add is, let's take funding as an example. If we ultimately want congressional funding, the way we get that is to get a lot of members to support funding. But the way you get a lot of members to support funding is by showing them how it impacts their districts. The challenges you're having in Central Florida are going to be different than the challenges you're having in Northern California or in Massachusetts. And so making the local message appeal to the member, but also what do we want you to do when you go back to DC? Here's the broader ask. I think that is an effective one pager.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Turning it back to you.
I stole it. Thank you all so much. Do you have any closing thoughts you want to share? I'll start with Roxy.
I think I would just go back to my normal soapbox message. Your voice matters. Don't be afraid to tell somebody what you need. Far too often we just say, well, I'm just a dispatch center. I'm not the sheriff. I'm not this. I'm not that. Your voice matters, and you're the expert on what's happening in your state, your town, your area. So just always remember that. It's important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Roxy.
I would say take the word just out of your vocabulary. Roxy and I have talked a lot about this. Share your story, and you're in a room because you're supposed to be there. And, you might sometimes have to like take a moment and be like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to United States members of Congress. Like, this is wild. Or I'm talking to this person or that person. You're absolutely supposed to be there. You're the smartest person about 911 when you're in the room. And so share that knowledge freely and openly. Because you do have a story to tell, and it's really, really important. And if you're not going to tell the story, somebody else is absolutely going to tell it for you, and they're going to leave the important parts out.
We are our best advocates.
That's right.
Nobody knows 911 like you do. And if we're not advocating for us, who's going to? So, well said. Christina, any closing thought?
I would say just kind of when you're scheduling these things, just focus on flexibility and persistence. Just make sure you're persistent, but not, too much. But yeah, flexibility is going to be key, I think, in getting these schedules. Is because, like you said, member schedules are very busy, very chaotic, and they change constantly. But we do our best to get to everything that we have on the schedule.
I remember one of my first experiences at 911 Goes to Washington. I was 20 something, just didn't know how any of this worked. And I was there with my friend Wendy, who's a policy expert and does know how these things work. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, there's a senator on the agenda. This is going to be so cool. And she's kind of looked at me. She's like, we'll see if they show up. So it's not just you. It is, like you said, it's very hectic. Wes, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think kind of to tie everything together, you guys are miracle workers and you're used to doing a lot with very little. And I think that there's a community of people here that want your voice to be heard. There are people that when they hear your story want to help. And so to the extent you can use the Institute to put you in touch with the right folks, we can work with Christina to help grow the caucus and help your voice be heard. It's okay to ask, right? And you guys have done a lot of really, really important, cool things on shoestring budgets. And so to the extent we can make sure your budget grows, that you're not an afterthought, let us help.
Thank you, Wes. And Laurie.
I'm going to go back to the idea of stories, because I think people don't necessarily remember stats, but they will remember the stories. Part of the reason we talked about Cheryl Kagan, who's a state senator from Maryland, the reason she got involved was because something happened to a friend of hers. And every time I've asked, like, where did your interest in 911 come from? There's always a story behind it. So to the extent that you can make that connection by telling the stories about the people that you serve, by answering those calls, that's what sticks. That's what sticks.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. This will be available on demand on playback here on Crowdcast, but we also are going to put it on our YouTube channel, which I will send you a link to as well. Every single one of our Empower panels that we've ever done is on our YouTube channel here, along with some other fun things. So check that out. We will be posting on all of our socials when that is officially up. And thank you all for joining us. And please reach out if you have any questions. You know how to find me. I know how to put you in charge with Wes. And we are going to keep working to build these relationships and get that funding needed for Next Gen 911. So thank you all and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks, guys.